Hi, I'm Shamon Harper, and today we're having a roundtable discussion about three topics when it comes to mental health. The first topic is like the medical model of mental health. What does that look like? What are the pros and cons of that? The second topic is the venture capitalist model, and we'll kind of go into the definition of that in a minute. And then lastly, our follow-up, or our last topic, is going to be on what does quality mental health care look like? And we have a really cool panel of professionals here today. Everybody here owns a therapy practice, and everybody here works in this industry and provides phenomenal service to their clients every day. But like I said, I'm Shamon, and I am co-founder of Harper Therapy. And we have Rebecca Williams, who, you can wave, yep, there you go, who is the owner of Inland Empire Couples Counseling in Southern California. She heads up a team that specializes in high-quality relationship counseling. We also have Erika Labuzan-Lopez. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and the owner of Center for Couples Counseling in League City, Texas. She specializes in couples therapy, infertility counseling, postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, and is an expert in minimalism concepts and how they apply to the therapeutic model. And then we have Tabitha Westbrook. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, a licensed professional counselor, and a certified clinical trauma professional. She owns and operates Journey in the Process in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and she and her team specialize in complex trauma, especially domestic abuse and coercive control. And then last but not least, we have Yolanda Harper, and she is a licensed clinical social worker, a TEDx speaker, and is co-owner with me of Harper Therapy, a practice in Tampa, Florida, and we help our community heal from trauma and the way trauma impacts families and relationships. So let's kind of dig right into it, and let's start with the medical model, right? We're using some broad kind of terms, but the idea here is someone's looking for therapy, and what does all this mean, right? So when we talk about the medical model of mental health, we're talking about traditional insurance billed model of health. Most of us are familiar with how this works. This is how we go to the doctor pretty much every day, right? You go, your insurance company, you pay a copay, your insurance company pays the rest of a contracted rate to a provider, right? And there's some good and bad with that. And I think our first topic we'll talk about here is maybe how this kind of discourages people with mild or moderate problems from seeking mental health care. And maybe, Rebecca, you can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that when we require something to have a diagnosis, that we maybe the medical model only really catches the people whose symptoms are really severe. And we may have other people who have mild to moderate symptoms. They're just at the very start of some kind of problem where mental health care or where therapy might help them. And they may be discouraged from seeking therapy and getting services that would really help them because either they don't qualify for a diagnosis, and so the insurance won't cover them, or they have this kind of block to overcome, but I'm not really that bad. So maybe my symptoms don't yet feel like it's bad enough that I have to go to a doctor, but I'm anxious all the time, or I'm, feeling kind of depressed, or maybe there's some relationship problems starting to show up. And those people might not seek mental health care when it's always housed under the umbrella of a medical establishment or a doctor's office. Or I know in managed healthcare settings, like your symptoms would have to be pretty severe for your primary care physician to say, I really think that what you need here is therapy. And I know for my specialty in particular with couples therapy, it's often tricky to get insurance to cover couples therapy, because if what you have is a relationship problem, your medical insurance doesn't consider that to be a healthcare problem, and so they might not cover it. But if your only option is for getting therapy is that you have to have your insurance pay for it, then people either just don't get the help that they need, or they and their therapist have to go through these kind of tricky, jump through some hoops to get the insurance to to cover their therapy, or almost like make up a diagnosis, which isn't ethical. And I think most therapists wouldn't do that anyway. But it presents these real challenges where I prefer a more preventative look at mental health care, where people if we can get them help when their symptoms are mild to moderate, we might not ever need to have the severe level of treatment, and people might not need to suffer as long if we're shifting the way that we think about who needs to go to therapy and how we pay for it and how we identify even who needs that help.
Right. Any other thoughts, comments with that, guys? Ladies?
Spot on.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it almost kind of feels counterintuitive though, right? Like, I have this insurance benefit, I should be able to use it, but because of the way the model is built, it's almost counter to me actually seeking and getting help and turning me away from help.
And it doesn't work the same way in mental health realm that it does in the medical field.
Right. Right. I mean, it's easier, like when you go to mental health field, right, or like not mental health, a regular doctor, and you have this thing, and they can easily diagnose it and move on, right, and or work through it, right, like getting to a diagnosis. It's a little more complex and a little slower, right?
Diagnosis isn't always helpful,
Right.
you know, and it's a requirement for insurance to even cover anything, like Becca was saying, that, you know, we label these things as disorders without any recognition of how those skills have actually helped someone survive serious traumatic events in their lives. And we're not even honoring that. It's sort of a reductionistic perspective on humanity and makes it really challenging for folks. And those labels that we give them as a diagnosis and submit to insurance follow them throughout their lives and throughout other experiences. And then when they're applying for jobs or, you know, trying to adopt, those things come up even if they've recovered fully. And that could cause problems where they say, no, you can't adopt a child, even though in a million different ways they're a fantastic fit for that. But they had PTSD from, you know, a traumatic experience or series of traumatic experiences in their own childhood, and now they're suddenly disqualified. But they've been recovered and healed for such a long time, and that's not taken into consideration. It can also make your insurance premiums go higher and things like that. So there's a lot that goes with it that I think folks don't necessarily realize, and that creates a barrier to care for people.
Right.
I'll also say that if you have reached out to a therapist on your insurance panel and left a message and not gotten a return phone call back from that clinician, that is because even though insurance companies are netting insane amounts of profits over these past couple of years, especially, that has not trickled down to providers. And so these therapists have had to stack their day full of appointments, and that doesn't allow for them to have time to return phone calls, which we all should be returning phone calls because it takes a lot for someone to reach out for help. But that also poses a problem because in order to pay their bills, clinicians are having to see more and more clients.
Sure. Going back to this, like, this diagnosis piece, right, Tabitha? I mean, you're talking about things that could really affect people down the line, right? You're talking about things that that aren't so easy when people first come into your office, and it's not like you're going to diagnose them in 10 minutes of seeing them, right? I mean, your average therapy session is probably, 45, 50 minutes versus your average doctor is booked 15 minutes out, right? It's, you know, trying to apply that medical model to like this whole different process is, it's complex. And like Tabby, you had said a few minutes ago, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to that at all.
Not at all. It really doesn't. I mean, it's a lot different than, you come in with a broken arm, it's a broken bone. There it is. You take an x-ray, broken bone. There you go. But, you come in with a broken heart, and it takes a lot longer to figure out what happened. And, there's a book by Oprah and another gentleman whose name is currently escaping me. But I love the concept of it. The question is, what happened to you? And it takes us a while to unpack that. People are coming in to this perfect stranger to talk about these soul level things that are sensitive and things that we need to honor and go slow with. And the medical model doesn't allow for that. They might say you only get so many sessions, or, so much of this. And I know, we all have thoughts about, them restricting the number of sessions. If you come to me and you've been in a domestic violence situation for 25 years, you didn't get there overnight, and we're not getting out overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Right.
And to be able to have the time and space to walk beside someone in these dark places and walk them out of that, I call it the valley of the shadow of death, into the light, takes a minute. And the medical model just doesn't even account for that in any way.
Right. Erika, you had a point that you had brought up to me earlier about it kind of diminishes the client's ability to utilize relational healing. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it piggybacks on Tabby's point just now of I tend to think about therapy as being a balance of art and science, and we're trying to work within a system that values science, or is attempting to value science. And so I think that, I've not met a single client that hasn't had a relational trauma or an attachment injury or something somewhere along the line that they've experienced in their childhood with their parents, with their partners, with somebody an hour ago, right? Those things are very real, and we can actually help our clients by bringing attention to that and being able to focus on our relationship with the clients. There's immense healing that happens through that experience alone. And if we want to go the science route, we know it's 60%. 60% of outcome is based on therapeutic alliance.
Right.
And insurance companies are whatever. Did you reduce their anxiety by X amount in this amount of weeks? And that's really what they're looking at. And to me, that sort of makes sense. They have to base what they're going to cover on some outcomes.
Sure.
But I just think it's at a detriment to our clients, honestly, and to us as therapists to not have the freedom to explore some of those things.
Right. It kind of takes that whole square hole round peg kind of, we're trying to shove it in there, right, and make it fit a thing that it doesn't necessarily fit. So
Right. And we have this other problem where when insurance is dictating what's covered and how many sessions a person gets, that then you have this insurance company, a corporation, that is making treatment decisions that should be in the hands of the licensed mental health professional who determines, are we making appropriate progress? Is this the correct number of sessions for this person? What actually are their needs? Those decisions are taken out of the hands of the person who has the training and qualifications to make those decisions, and the decisions then get made by some kind of, algorithm.
Right.
Or, what the insurance company has deemed the lowest number of sessions to feel like we, met our obligation.
And I think that also has a lot to do with the difference between true healing that is possible in therapy as opposed to the alleviation of symptoms. And there's a big difference between the two of those things. And the medical model promotes the alleviation of symptoms. But we know in the true deep healing that happens in our rooms and in our spaces that, oftentimes someone will come in with what they perceive as the problem or the symptom, and it's just the surface level of what's truly going on. We know that with trauma, we know that with relationship. So, just across the board.
Right. You had touched a little bit, Yolanda, on a few minutes ago on caseload, insurance reimbursement, caseload for providers, and how it kind of, I think you were kind of going down the road of it can kind of overwhelm or create a situation where you're working too hard as a provider. You want to talk about that a little more?
Well, it for me, and I was on insurance panels in the past, and I decided to come off of them for several different reasons. One was that reimbursement continued to go down, and that just is in stark contrast again to the fact that these insurance companies are having, profitable years. It also, I recognized it was causing me to compromise the quality of the work that I was doing and the depth of the work and the healing that I was able to be present with my clients for. And as a trauma therapist, if an insurance company is decreasing my reimbursement by 30%, and my option is to increase my caseload by 30%, and trauma work takes a toll. I mean, it's deep work. Then that was causing me to compromise how I was showing up in sessions. And that just wasn't okay for me. It was compromising my ability to return phone calls, to people who had reached out for help. It was compromising my ability to make sure that I was prepared going into the next session. It left me very little time to even just run to the bathroom and maybe grab, a snack or something, a drink of water before jumping back into the next session, not feeling like I was able to be as prepared as I wanted to be.
Right. And how do you do your best work when you're always on the back
possible.
foot?
It wasn't possible for me.
Right.
Well, and I think we're asking clients to take care of themselves, and we're responsible for helping them to step outside of themselves. And what are we modeling by running ourselves into the ground and overworking and trying as quick as we can to eat something and run to the bathroom, but we want them to be self-actualized.
Right.
It's pretty hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in trauma work, it's necessary to be the calm presence in the room. And when I'm scrambling, between session and session, that's the therapeutic use of self. That's the depth of how we, are present to our clients. And so if I'm not able to bring that into a session, I'm setting myself up for failure. I'm setting this therapeutic relationship for failure, and I'm setting my client up for failure. And I just couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
And it really limits the length of session also, because they will not pay for anything over 60 minutes, and they really argue about 53 to 60 minutes as it is. And I have found, especially with complex trauma and using EMDR, we need longer sessions, and we need to be able to go slower to help people process. So it's not uncommon for me to do hour and a half, 2-hour sessions, even intensives, where I spend several days with a client and do work with them so that they can get through what they need to get through. It's a terrible thing. And I also took insurance at one point to say, hey, we're at 45 minutes. I know we're right in the middle of processing this major thing, but let's box it up and I'm going to send you home.
Right.
That just didn't feel good to me.
Yeah.
Right.
When my commitment up to them up to that point is I'm here with you in this and we'll get through it together. And then to say, oh, our time is up.
Right.
Not cool.
Any other thoughts on the medical model before we shift gears?
I just want to say that it's not universal that if you're using your insurance to get therapy, that means that you're going to have a bad experience.
Sure.
We're just talking system wide, that there are some issues with this being the primary way that people access therapy, and that the choices about how long the sessions are, how much they get paid, who makes those decisions are kind of in the wrong hands.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Right.
I think it's important to that point, Becca, that, if we want people, part of what we're doing here is we want people to understand some things about mental health and about therapy and what options there are out there. We would love it if there were an uprising, if you will, maybe that's a strong word, of people calling legislators and insurance companies and going, this isn't okay. We want help. I don't begrudge any organization making a profit. I begrudge it when it's at the expense of other human beings.
Right.
And that's what we see with the model. And so there are amazing therapists that have an insurance-based practice who are doing incredible work. What we would like to see is, if you have insurance, we'd love to be able to take it and do it in a way that you get what you need from, all therapists who take insurance. And And I think that would be, if we could have anything, that'd be the outcome, right?
Sure.
That this is done well.
Yes.
So let's shift gears a little bit here. Let's start talking about the venture capitalist model a little bit. And that's kind of a ambiguous term, right? I think to define it, we would be saying this is a space where therapy is being offered through apps. I don't think you can open Facebook today without being bombarded with ads about mental health apps and how we're going to make your life better and do all these things, right? But largely, these are companies that are positioning themselves to be a tech company, right? First and foremost, and they're providing a platform to offer mental health services, all right? And some examples might be like Talkspace or BetterHelp and things like that, and there's a plethora more of them. But we're literally talking about companies that are providing this platform, and the people that are actually providing the services are contracted to do that work for them, which is typical in healthcare anyway, that people are contracted to do a lot of healthcare for them. But it's almost like there's a bit of a separation between the company itself and the services that the company's saying that we're a mental health company, but really we're a tech company. So we're not necessarily talking about doing a virtual a session with your therapist, right? We're talking about these platforms that are built, and there's messaging, and there's texting, and there's some video sessions involved, and there's all kinds of forms being sent back and forth, and it's a platform. It's a completely different thing than meeting with your therapist through like a Zoom or Doxy or any of those pretty common methodologies. I want to start with Erika on this, and really you had a point kind of about how it portrays a bit of an unrealistic expectation and unhealthy boundaries. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think the same sort of caveat as as Becca was pointing out about the insurance companies. I don't think we intend to say that using these types of services or platforms are necessarily bad or wrong or negative, right? I think that people have had a variety of experiences. That's kind of what I learned in my research anyway. But I think to what you were saying about the delivery of services, I think it might be helpful for potential clients to view them as clients of this tech company instead of clients of the therapists.
Right.
So that may help people sort of make this distinction in their brain. We're like, okay, hold on, actually I'm paying into XYZ company and I'm their client. I'm not the client of Erika, right? But you'll see on a lot of these ads that right from the get-go, there are very unrealistic expectations, I think, set up for people who are interested in these services. Some that seem totally illogical to me, honestly. Like they say that you can set up an appointment with your therapist at any time. Well, if I'm seeing client A at 9 o'clock, I cannot see you at 9 o'clock. So that doesn't even make sense to me. And I think it leads to a lot of disappointment because clients are going to have or anticipating experiencing this relief. Oh, I'm going to sign up for this service and it's going to be awesome. And I'm going to get an appointment tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And then, they're saying, oh, we don't have anybody available for you. Which I think leads to some of these other issues about, not being able to get the help that you really need when you've finally made that step to actually get that met. So I know there's the ones about the texting. You can text your therapist at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
One, your therapist will probably not answer if they're a decent therapist anyway. And two, I think people really need to understand, again, you're not a client of the therapist, you're a client of XYZ platform company, tech company, and they are always finding ways to market to you. And by them saying, you can't solve your problems on your own, you need to be texting your therapist at 1 o'clock in the morning, they are reinforcing your need to rely on their service. And I don't think that's something a lot of people are thinking about when they're thinking about, oh, it'd be wonderful to text my therapist at 1 o'clock in the morning. Right. And there's so many reasons that it would not be, and please nobody text me at that time.
Right.
So Tabitha, can you talk a little bit about therapist abandonment?
Yeah, I have heard from a number of clients that have come to me after using a service like that their therapist was suddenly just gone off the platform, or they were suddenly reassigned for reasons they don't know, or they were ghosted. And like they were supposed to go to a session, therapist never joined or never responded. And again, like Erika was saying, this is not like this is every therapist on these platforms does these things, but I hear it enough that wonder how often it does happen. And that's really concerning, because especially if you have, if you've taken the moment of courage, right? Like, coming to counseling is courageous.
Mm-hmm.
It is incredibly courageous. And you've taken those steps, and then you aren't met with all of the things that we should meet people with. That's deeply hurtful. And for some people, they don't recover, like, to come back to counseling, right? Like, the ones that come to me were like, this was my first counseling experience. I thought this is how it was. And I'm like, this is not how it is. This is not ever how it should be. And then they work with me and they're like, gosh, it's so different. And that's the piece that worries me for clients. What if they don't come back?
Right.
And they could have really benefited, and their problem gets worse, and then they are seen in an ER, or they are having to be hospitalized, or they have a marriage that fails, or a relationship that's severed with their child. There are so many implications here that not having it done well is deeply concerning to me. And from the stories I hear, it happens, and that is worrisome.
So you're talking about a little bit about not having done it well, and I think that kind of leads into a topic that Rebecca had brought up about it can lead to not good therapy at times, right?
Right, because the tech platforms are set up to give you a quick fix and to keep you engaged in their platform, because then they can market more services to you. And the whole design of the system is not set up for you to have lifelong transformation. Mm. I know from having talked to the other people on this call that we have all put a lot of thought into the processes, the policies, the procedures that we have in our practice, how we decide who's a good fit for us, who's not a good fit for us, how we run our practices down to the timing of the sessions, the length of the sessions, how often we expect to meet with you. And all of that is done with this intention of, we have this set up because we know it gives you the best outcomes. And we also, to my point before, we also have the professional training to know, like, we know the laws in our state, we know the ethical codes of our license, and we have, these years and years of experience to know that these are the ways that we can set things up that give people good results. And the tech companies just aren't set up that way. They might have someone who's a clinical consultant who helps them kind of think through things, but they are set up primarily to make money and keep people engaged in the platform. And so just the way that the therapy is set up isn't done from the framework of, this is how we create deep healing and lifelong transformation for people. And we hear rumors of the tech companies encouraging the therapist to do unethical things, or acknowledging that, we know that you're breaking the law here, but we'll just cover your legal fees if you happen to get caught. And our businesses aren't set up that way. That isn't good therapy, especially if your therapist is an ethical therapist and is working on one of these platforms and they feel like they're in a bind because they can't serve you in the best way. And it also is an issue if we're only working on quick fix stuff.
Right.
It's just kind of treating the symptoms and not getting down to the stuff that's causing the symptoms. And I know that for my clients, that's what I want to help them get to, is is it going to be harder work? Yes. Is it going to keep you engaged in therapy a little bit longer? Probably. But the idea is that if we can fix the thing that's causing it, then you don't have to be a client of mine for forever.
Right.
This isn't going to be, this therapy subscription isn't something that shows up on your credit card for forever because you always need the service. If I'm doing my job well, I move you through a healing process, and then you don't need me anymore. So that's one of my issues here. Is my concern is that the venture capitalist model isn't set up to be great therapy.
Right.
Which isn't to say that some people can't make a connection and have a good experience with their therapist on the platform, but the whole system isn't set up for that.
Right. I mean, I can definitely. Part of me wants to say some access is better than no access, right? But I think we live in a world where we can do good access, So maybe bad access isn't good enough, And that's like maybe my opinion on the venture capitalist model. And the idea that when you do go really read through their stuff, they're a tech company, like Erika was saying. You are when you get an Uber, right? You're getting an Uber. Like you don't think about I'm getting Joe driving the Uber car. I'm getting an Uber, right? So it's the same way with BetterHelp. I'm getting BetterHelp or Talkspace. I'm getting Talkspace, and somebody provides me a service in that. It's really not that same kind of connection and relationship and service being provided at all, right? Yolanda, I feel like I'm piling up on you because I think earlier you talked a little bit about overworked and overwhelmed, but yet, the same thing kind of applies to this venture capitalist model as well, right? In a way that it's incentivized.
Well, and just to piggyback on what Rebecca was saying a minute ago, as far as like these tech companies, their policies and procedures being across the board with no consideration as to what our ethics and legalities are in each state, because each state has independent requirements. And we're in the state of Florida. In the state of Florida, text therapy is not allowed. It's illegal. It's illegal. So if you are seeing a therapist on one of these platforms in the state of Florida and you're texting back and forth,
right,
that's not cool. That's not cool. And, there is like, can be some conversation around, well, should it be legal, whatever. But right now, that's just the requirement. That's the law. Also, I hopped on a call with one of these companies because they're recruiting hot and heavy right now, just to kind of see what they had to say so that I could speak, from my experience with that. And they do have sign-on bonuses, which isn't uncommon, right? That's fine. But what was really concerning for me is the person who was sharing their experience of working on this platform was talking about how they have up to 10 clinical sessions in a day. I would not want anyone, I know that there are plenty of us who work 10 hours a day, but I would not want anyone to work 10 hours a day, face-to-face, client-facing therapy services, for one. For two, I would hate to be the 10th client of that person's day, because they've got to be tired. That's a long day. And also, these platforms are incentivizing therapists to message clients outside of their therapy appointments. Again, kind of telling you have to stay engaged with this platform, right, in order to be well, whether it's clinically indicated or not, whether that's actually what's best for the client or not. And this clinician was saying that they send out worksheets to their clients as well in order to engage them so that the platform could bill more, so that the clinician could bill more. And so, again, not even indicating that this was clinically appropriate or necessary. Don't get me started on worksheets. I think there's much deeper therapy that we can do, much deeper work that's going to be longer lasting. Certainly worksheets can be a portion of that, but if that is the primary component of therapy, we're missing out. And I think that's my biggest concern. If these experiences are what people are having and they're calling this therapy, that's a big concern for me, because therapy is so much more than these platforms that tend to keep things more surface level.
Right, that's going
and
back
there's concern too on some of the platforms will pay the therapist based on how many words they type to the client, and that is in relation to how much the client sent to them. So if the client sent you so many words, you can send like a proportional number of words back to them. So you may have a therapist who is engaging with you more on the platform and saying more than what really needs to be said, because that's part of how they earn their money. Or your therapist, again, is in an ethical bind where if you sent, something about how you're really in crisis, or you are having suicidal thoughts or something, and your message was really short, your therapist might either respond to you very shortly in a few number of words because that's all they get paid for, or they're spending a bunch of unpaid time helping you because that's the right thing to do. And that's not really fair to the therapist. Again, impacts their feelings about their job, how they feel about you. You don't want your therapist to be developing resentment toward you because the platform is set up in a way that they don't get paid for some of the work that they do for you if you send a short message and they send a long one back, because that's what's right for you.
Right.
I'm just going back to what you're saying, Rebecca, about the crisis stuff. I worked for one of these platforms for 30 days and got off quickly because there were things like that they were asking. And also, they did not require clients to provide real names and addresses. And if you have a suicidal client, it is our ethical duty to get them help, right? I believe all 50 states have a reporting requirement for that. And if you don't know who or where they are, even if there's an IP address that this venture capital company can tie them to, you have to, let's say you have a Saturday morning session. You have to get a hold of somebody and tell them, hey, I need this information. Then they have to figure it out and talk to the right people. And it's terrifying that you might not be able to get someone in crisis help when they need it. And the companies will tell you, well, we screen, for that. Well, that's great. I'm glad that you screen to see if someone's suicidal, but I can tell you once we get into a relationship with them and we're doing the deep work, maybe they become that way and we have to intervene because, or they were that way and they weren't honest with you in the screening. And so we leave people without options to get help. And that's terrifying to me as a therapist. Whereas like if you're working with me directly, and we're not on these platforms, I know who you are, I know what your address is, I know where you're at. Even if we're doing teletherapy and we're in a video session, I still know where you are. Like, I can get you help if I need to get you help. Right. And that's a huge, huge thing that we want to just keep in consideration.
Right. A few years ago, I had a therapist come to work for me in my practice, and she was leaving one of these platforms, and because of ethical concerns. She was like, I haven't been on it for very long, but I don't like the way that they're doing things. I have ethical concerns. And her request of me was, would it be okay if I let my clients know that I'm leaving, and would I be able to see them here because I have concerns about leaving them in the care of this tech company. So that kind of stuff happens too. But your good therapist who knows their ethical duties, who is really interested in providing good therapy, might not stay on the platform long term. And then you end up having this stuff like Tabby was talking about earlier, where clients end up feeling abandoned, and it really impacts their experience in therapy, which is unfortunate.
And can I just add the flip side of that? I don't think it's therapeutic as well. The ability for a client to switch therapists mid-route, regardless. Now, there's certainly an importance of being connected and having a good relationship with your therapist. And sometimes the depth of the work that you do can cause you to feel some uncomfortable things towards your therapist. And that's part of therapy too, is working through those things. And the ability on those platforms for a client to opt out of that relationship and just choose another therapist, that's really concerning to me too.
Right, because if we get to somewhere in therapy where this is making me uncomfortable and I don't like feeling uncomfortable, so I'm just going to switch therapists.
Right.
And then maybe I stay with that one long enough until they say something
like
makes me feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Right, where if you didn't have that facility to switch therapists really quickly, any one of us would know how to help you work through those uncomfortable feelings, because your healing is probably just on the other side of that.
Right.
But if it's too easy to switch, you never get through that.
Right. And we've all written policies and procedures with that, taking those things into account. Right. So yeah, that's as big of a concern for me as the other stuff.
And if we aren't a good fit, all of us here would help you find someone else, right? And do a warm handover where we, talk to the other therapists that we're helping you connect with and give them information so you don't have to tell your story again.
But again, it creates this cycle where, again, my biggest concern is people walking away from these experiences going, I tried 5 different therapists and therapy just doesn't work. And therapy does work. Good therapy works.
Well, I think
And
another
really maybe-
concern on the other side of that too is that, to my understanding, there's not a lot of options if the work is outside of the therapist's scope. So if I get paired with somebody who's an eating disorder client that I'm not qualified to treat and would far be outside of my scope, I don't think it's that easy. I would have to explain that to the client, and it would be the client's responsibility to switch therapists. And there would be a process, right, in my practice for that I agree is the same thing. It's not part of their policies here.
Right.
And just to go to that point, Erika, since our group specializes in domestic abuse and coercive control, anything that is text-based on your computer can be tracked, right? So if you have a abusive partner who is monitoring your stuff and all of your therapy is online through one of these platforms, you're creating this record, and that can put you in danger. And I don't know, maybe they have policies that I'm unaware of, but I don't know what their policies are around protecting victims of abuse, right? I don't even hand things to clients in sessions when we're talking about certain things, because if they take it home and leave it out, it could end their life realistically. And so just being mindful of how protected is your information in general. And we do know that if we read these terms of service, they do sell information. There's actually a Consumer Reports article from last year about your data at some of these companies not being terribly private. And that's really concerning, because that can put people at real risk, right? Not only your privacy and your confidentiality being at risk when it shouldn't be, but also your very safety can be put at risk depending on what you're coming to therapy for. And that's something that just makes me have a massive pause.
All right, so I'm gonna switch gears on you guys again. All right, we've talked about the insurance model, the medical model of mental health. We've talked here about the venture capital model of mental health. So to you guys, what does quality mental health look like, mental health care look like to you? And I'll start with Yolanda.
So I could go on and on about what I believe is quality mental health care, but I will say that I believe quality mental health care is well thought out and intentional. It's a therapist who's highly trained and continually looking for ways to improve their clinical skill and their clinical services to you. And that means that we intentionally leave some room for that training, for that clinical development, for that taking our policies and procedures into account to say, how can I tweak this and make this even a better experience, a more healing experience, a more depth experience for the people that I'm sitting across, so that we can bring the greatest amount of hope, growth, and healing through this therapy experience.
Tabitha, you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, first of all, your information is protected, right? Like, there's no hidden charges either. So, like, I like to say we're the least surprising group of individuals ever, because we're going to give you an informed consent that says, here's what you're going to pay. This is it. And so there's not anything hidden. We're not selling your stuff. We're bound by ethics to keep everything confidential. I like to say to folks that come see me, like, we're like Las Vegas. What happens here stays here, except for like the things that we have to report, right? Like, so you're safe within these spaces and walls. And like Yolanda was saying, we practice in a way that meets the needs of the client. So, therapy is not one size fits all by any means. It's what does this person need? And so for a client, we may do some trauma reprocessing using EMDR. We might use brain spotting, or we may even bring art into it. Whatever's going to work for that particular client, we're going to do. And we have the freedom to do that in a good therapeutic situation, and also honoring people as people, right? Your autonomy isn't, as the kids say, yeeted when you come into the room, right? You still remain your personhood and your ability to make decisions. And if you're like, I always tell my clients, like, hey, if you think that this, like, you're like, dude, Tabitha, you have lost your mind. Tell me, let's talk about it. Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't. I have a really good reason for what we're doing, and we can talk about it, and you have input on how this goes. Like, I'm not a dictator, and we get to do this together and take this amazing journey together. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of what good therapy looks like. We're a team.
What about you, Erica? You want to talk about it a little bit?
Well, I think quality therapy is being with a therapist who will use the word yeeted. We know Tabby's a great therapist. I mean, in that vein, I think, that's part of it for me, is being in relationships with an authentic person. So I know that I might not use the word yeeted, but I've definitely given a good curse word here and now in session, right? And I think that good therapy is spacious, if I had to put like one word on it. So I think, having time to go through these things, to do a thorough assessment, right? Not a 45-minute, okay, now I know everything about you that I need to make this really big decision about your care. No, we can take 10 sessions if we need to. We can take 20 sessions if we need to. We have the space and we have the room for that. And I think, to Tabby's point as well, like for me, it's about asking clients what's working for you, what's not working for you. How am I showing up? How do you perceive me? I'm going to give them feedback about how I perceive them. A lot of here and now work. And I think that asking them about those outcomes, like, is this actually doing anything for you? And if it's not, let's change it. Or if I'm not the right person, let's change that. I think being dedicated to, like, I want you to heal no matter where that is or what that looks like. And so we can make adjustments here. And that's huge.
Yeah. All right, Rebecca, what about you?
Yes to everything that's been said already. And, good therapy is a relationship that you can trust with a real human. And, Erika mentioned the stat earlier that 60% of the effectiveness of therapy, regardless of the modality, is about the relationship that happens between the therapist and the client. So whether you're there for coercive control or couples therapy or trauma or eating disorders or any substance use, any of the other, like the particular presenting problems or the skill of the therapist, you have to have a relationship with the person. And that's a huge part of what makes therapy work. And so that's why it's a problem for us that in some other models, you don't get as much choice in who your therapist is, or your therapist may or may not have the right skills for you, or they may just ghost you or whatever, because we know that that's what makes therapy work. And that real relationship includes that because I'm here as your therapist and so dedicated to your healing, I'm going to challenge you sometimes, and that might make you feel uncomfortable. And I'm going to also stay with you through those uncomfortable feelings if it's for your own good. And like was mentioned a couple of times already, if part of that relationship is if I can see that this isn't helping you, I'm not just going to abandon you, or I'm not going to continue doing something that doesn't work. I'm going to learn the skills I need to, or I'm going to help you find the right person if I'm not the right person. And therapy is also individualized, good therapy. So I'm going to make a treatment plan that is specific to you. If I give you a worksheet, it's because that's what I think is going to help in your healing, not because this is the same worksheet that I give everybody. Because if that stuff was all that you needed, you could pick up a workbook. You could read a book and you would get it.
Yeah.
But that isn't enough. You have to have a relationship with a real human who you feel that you can trust. And that's where all of this other stuff comes back together. Your relationship isn't with the insurance company. Your relationship shouldn't be with the tech company. That's why it matters when the therapist returns your phone call or has a staff member who can return your phone call. That's why it matters if your therapist is available to you, or if you're the 10th client of the day. That's where all of that stuff shows up, because if I'm always my therapist's 10th or 12th client of the day, maybe they're less attentive. Maybe they don't remember details about me, and that impacts my ability to trust them. And so my therapy will be less effective.
Sure.
So yeah, that's what good therapy is.
Yeah. And I think the willingness to have that time and space. So like all of these pieces and have those conversations of, what do you want to be different? How will your life look differently at the end of therapy that's going to bring lifelong change? What are the things that you're going to gain from therapy that you're going to carry with you throughout the rest of your life? Not just what's going to help alleviate what's happening right now. That's included in that bigger picture, but that's not the primary focus. This is. That's what I think is quality therapy.
And truthfully, therapy changes not just the person sitting in front of us, but everyone else they touch. I always say that, we're changing the world one relationship at a time. I see a client and they become a better, healthier mother, father, sister, brother, son, and then they go out and they take that with them. And then, these things that may have gone on in families that are generational. I love me a good genogram, which is basically a souped up family tree with all your problems to define it. And all the ways relationship hasn't worked for you. But, when we break those generational curses, if you will, it changes everything. It changes the lives of future generations. We're all, if we want to get real meta about it, we're all impacting each other's DNA just through the relationships that we're in. And real healing comes in community. And that community can start with us, and then you take it out with you. And then you are changing relationships because you're healthier. And that's an amazing place. That's a beautiful thing. I can't tell you how many times we've had whole families change. And I know we all can say this through the work that we've done, that whole families have been changed because we saw maybe one person, or we saw a couple and something completely shifted.
That's awesome.
I think therapy is one of the few places where you get to focus on these strengths, right? There's not a lot of other places where we're getting direct feedback from somebody that may not always be comfortable, but that, the therapist can reframe that and say, okay, well, how can we take your strengths that you already possess, that already exist within you, to be able to show up differently, to engage in your life differently, to engage in your relationships differently. And that's a pretty cool, unique experience that I don't know if I've ever had in other relationships, maybe other than with you also.
I agree. And I think that good therapy also shifts the paradigm of the way that we look at mental health in this country. When you think of these deeper lasting changes, and, I know as a trauma therapist, there was a big, for a long time that it's not possible to heal from trauma. But it is, right? And good therapy is an indication of that lifelong change. Good therapy is an indication that I don't have to learn just coping skills for my anxiety. I can figure out what's underneath the anxiety. Good therapy is, there's something deeper than just my partner and I not having good communication skills, right? So it starts to shift the paradigm of how we look at mental health, and really mental and emotional and relational and spiritual wellness.
Right. And, we're finding more and more that not only does mental health help your mental health, but it helps your physical health. And so good therapy can also impact you physically. And I can't tell you how many survivors of abuse I have worked with who've gotten healthy and in different places. And all of a sudden, all these autoimmune things that they were struggling with aren't as hard. Now, they may not go away, but suddenly their bodies are functioning better. Their hair stops falling out. All of these things that happen, and you're like, wow. And we realize how much our mind, bodies, and souls are connected to each other. And we are healing not just your mind and your emotions, but your whole self. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to bear witness to, and also for the people who are experiencing it.
I mean, I think on that note, you might as well just drop the mic and and call it done. I mean, I don't know. I think it's a perfect way to end this conversation today. And Tabby, Becca, Erika, Yolanda, this is really, really cool to sit down and talk to you guys and just kind of work through this a little bit. I hope this is something that can be used, that people can kind of watch and kind of say, oh, this is what good therapy looks like. This is what these things look like and that look like. So I really appreciate you guys' time today and doing this. And maybe we'll do it again down the road.